Hello and welcome to this week's, maybe, episode of Strange Pathways. I am your host, Scott Mort. It's been a little while, and I'm happy to say life is starting to slow down. I'm here, it's Memorial Day Monday as I'm recording. I'm hoping I can get everything edited and put together and have the episode out tonight. I've had my surgery, I've mostly recovered, got a massive chunk of glass out of my foot, and I'm feeling so much better. A lot of work yet to come, but boy, for the first time in a long time, it feels like I'm on the right track. I found something marvelous, and I desperately want to share it with each and every one of you. I was looking for more validation, I guess, more proof that my thought that everything in the paranormal is actually one thing behaving differently. I've said it before. If you see a light in your house, it's a ghost, but all of a sudden, if it's up in the sky, it's a UFO. You know, Bigfoot and UFOs seem to be very closely tied together. It's all one thing. And I found a channel that is absolutely amazing and criminally, and I mean this, criminally undersubscribed. Case File X. I reached out to the gentleman who runs Case File X, Caleb. Wonderful individual. He does everything about 1,000 times better than I do. Absolutely amazing individual. I hope to keep in contact with him as he grows. My wife and I were watching the channel, and she looked at me and went, "He's going to be big." And I believe her. And I'll tell you what. He has a video over there about the moon landing photos. Not the moon landing, but the moon landing photos being hoaxed. And this video is so well done. It is so well produced. The evidence laid out in such a way, he's convinced me. He's absolutely convinced me. And you know what? I'm gonna put stuff out there. I don't believe the earth is flat. I believe the earth is round. I've seen the earth's shadow on the moon. No evidence, and I have looked, no evidence has ever been able to convince me. I believe that we humans went to the moon. I believe we did it using our technology. But for the first time, somebody has convinced me, hey, maybe these photos are fake. Maybe you need to re-look at the evidence. And for that, I thank him. It takes a lot to change my mind. And that one did it. I am absolutely convinced the photos were faked. I'm still convinced we went there. 100% I believe that man has walked on the moon, and that Buzz Aldrin and Armstrong were the first to get up there. Collins flying around. Absolutely. But those photos, maybe things didn't work out quite as well as they could have. I think those photos were probably faked, and that's because of Case File X. Go over there and subscribe. An absolutely amazing channel. Now, on to today's tales. Our next tale comes to us from a listener of the show, Christian. Christian is a really good friend of mine. I've known Christian since he was a kid. I taught the young lad drum lessons. He wasn't the best student, but you know what? He was a good kid, and he's grown into an amazing man, and I'm very proud of him. Christian went to Edinboro University back in the summer of 2016. He wanted to share a story, and I'm going to just lay it out word for word. I asked Christian if he'd like to record the story. He said no, he'd like me to tell it. But in an effort to get this as accurate as possible, I am going to read the story for you. This was back in the summer of 2016 when I was attending college. I was at Edinboro University working towards my degree in environmental biology. My friend and I were watching movies and decided on a late night trip to Sheetz. This is Scott. Little note here. Sheetz is a 24-hour convenience store in this area. If you're from California, if you're from the South, think Wawa, think 7-Eleven. We do have 7-Elevens here. But Sheetz is a pretty big deal. So, back to Christian's story. My friend and I were watching movies and decided on a late night trip to Sheetz to get some slushies. This was about 10-11 p.m. We were driving along South Perry Lane, heading north. He was driving and I was in the passenger seat. I look out the window and I see what I can only describe as the red light from a cell phone tower, but a bit dimmer. We had both been living in the area for 4 years at this point, and I knew where the cell phone towers were on the horizon. This was not a normal spot for a light, so it caught my attention. Also, this was almost directly above us. We would have been at the base of the tower for it to be this high in the sky. So I asked my friend to pull over, and we looked at it for a few minutes, asking each other what we thought it was. I wouldn't have thought anything of it if it wasn't for what happened next. As we lose interest, either he or myself, I cannot remember, spots something in the woods. I can only describe them as 3 balls of bluish white light. However, they were not giving off light, for as bright as they were, they should have been illuminating the woods, but they were not. They were weaving in between the tops of the trees silently. We would see a tree block out the lights in the front, then the light would pass in front and block out the tree. We watched them for a minute or so when we noticed they were coming in our direction. We were not scared, we just didn't want to be there when they got to us, so we hopped back in the car and drove off. I watched them for the last 10 seconds they were visible. We didn't know what they really were, or if they were connected to the red lights in the sky. The red light was enough for us to pull over and be baffled at what it could be. We thought maybe the lights in the woods were flashlights from people. However, they were not what flashlights looked like. They were not illuminating the area. These balls were also 4 or 5 feet in diameter, I would estimate. They were also moving too fast to be held by people, and is such a strange weaving movement, as well as being in the tops of the trees, not on the ground. Another part of this story is that this happened almost 10 years ago. And anytime me and my friend talk and play video games together, almost weekly, we've never talked once about what happened that night. I did ask him about 3 or 4 years ago, asking, "Do you remember that night we saw something in the woods?" And he only responded with, "Yeah." I have attached locations of where this took place. The street view in from where I remember pulling over with the blue dots being where the lights were. Same with the top-down projection. X is where the car was pulled over, and the dots were where we saw the lights. Thanks again, and love the show. Well, Christian, I love you. Thank you for listening. I'm going to put up on the Strange Pathways Facebook and the Instagram and Twitter the top-down projections and the map of where Christian saw all this happen. If you're watching on YouTube, hey, just look up and they'll be there. I get I get a lot of, well, everybody who sees these are kind of hicks. They're kind of yahoos. They're mentally unsound. My buddy Christian is a scientist, right? Now, granted, he's not an astrophysicist. He's not an astronomer, and I will give you that. But, I mean, this is a tough dude who knows what he sees. He's spending time out in the Alaskan Sea doing observations on the marine wildlife out there. I don't care who you are, and we're going to have another Alaska story a little bit later in the show. I don't care who you are. If you're in Alaska, you're tough. Plain and simple, that is not a place for wusses. And the field that Christian is in is not a field where one can be lax about their observations. Now, I'm not saying Christian saw aliens or ghosts. I don't think Christian is saying that either. But what Christian is saying is that he saw something that he, as a college-educated and trained observer, cannot understand nor identify. And on top of it, it seems to be playing some sort of mental trick where it's almost a forced forgetfulness. I mean, I think that warrants further investigation. I think we've all heard the phrase, incredible claims require incredible evidence. But maybe we should amend that. Number one, who said that? I didn't make that up. That just seems to have been dropped in our lap. That's not a rule. And number two, maybe we should amend that to incredible claims require incredible investigation. I think our world would probably be a lot better off if we did. Diane and Keith Williams wanted a nice little house in the woods. And in London, Ohio, they found that. They quickly purchased it. Family moved in. Things didn't stay calm, though. One night, Diane heard scampering noises outside of her new home. She didn't see anything out the window. Perhaps it was just a stray dog. Maybe a deer from the woods. But it just didn't feel right. Diane looked out again, and that's whenever she saw the eyes. These eyes were at her level, not near the ground like a dog or a rodent would be, and they kept following her. Diane would move from the kitchen to the living room, look out the window, and the eyes would be staring at her from the living room window. From the living room to the bedroom, at the bedroom window, those eyes would return. They just kept following her. Keith was taking night school courses. He returned home, took out a flashlight, and went investigating. As is often the case in these situations, Keith found nothing. Week or two passes. Diane's doing dishes and she sees the eyes again. This time, very, very close to the window. So close that she backed slowly into another room. Once again, as before, the eyes followed Diane. Diane started to turn off lights, one by one, thinking that if it might not be able to see her, perhaps she could either see it or it would leave. Diane returned to the window, and she saw a person standing there. Diane rushed to her phone, called the police, and sat in the dark, waiting. She could hear the person move from the front of the house to the rear. But then the police arrived. They searched, and just as Keith the week before, found nothing. 4 months pass. Right after the first snow of the year in London, Ohio, Keith woke up early. He wanted to do something nice for the family. He went out and he got donuts for everyone. He started his car, rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, and he looked in the rearview mirror. There were the eyes. Keith grabs his flashlight, jumps out of the car, and freezes at the sight of the tracks in the snow. But these tracks are going over the roof. Keith decides to call one of his friends, Dennis. Ask him to come over, bring his gun. And they decide, we've got tracks. We've got weapons. Let's follow this and end this. Now, the creature is huge. Sometimes they lost the trail because of how powerful and long this jump was. It wasn't human. Dennis and Keith tracked the creature mile after mile after mile, from the early morning well until the sun came up. The footprints eventually led them to a clearing, and in that clearing was a cabin, a very small cabin. The tracks led right to the back door. Dennis runs over to the house, bangs on the walls, tells it, "Get out, get out, get out." But Keith has a more subtle approach. Keith realizes how the situation looks. Two guys outside of a cabin, guns, yelling, "Come out," banging on the walls. This is not good. This is not good at all. Keith pulls out his phone, calls his father, asks for a lift. They explained to Keith's dad the situation and why they were out there. And Keith's dad goes, "I know who lives in that cabin. It's an old man who works at the tire store." Dennis decides that he's going to go take a look at this man. He shows up with a tire. This way they could take it, get it patched, get a look at the old man. They go to the store and the manager calls out the man, George. He comes out of the shadows to get the tire and locks eyes with Keith and Dennis. And they knew it was him. George's eyes were an intense gold color. George, a massive man, takes the tire back into a room, a dimly lit dark room, and begins to work on it. George will not even exit the room. Whenever he's done with the tire, he rolls it from the darkness and out into the office. The manager puts the tire into the back of the truck. Keith and Dennis look at the tire. There's markings in chalk around part of the tire like they'd never seen before. Keith doesn't want to worry his wife, Diane. But he says, maybe your sister should come over when he wasn't there. 3 months pass. Dennis calls Keith. We're going for a ride. They drove out to George's cabin, and on the way, Dennis tells Keith, George has died. Now, Dennis is friends with the deputy sheriff, and he decides that he's going to ask the sheriff to take them up to the cabin. The sheriff knocks on the door, makes sure no one is inside, and walks inside while Dennis and Keith wait. After a few moments, the sheriff comes out, looks at Keith and Dennis. He seems a bit shaken. He goes, "You guys have got to see this." The three men re-enter the cabin, and it smells like wet dogs. There are no personal items, no food, nothing. But then the deputy shows them the other room. Behind a door, they found a room with walls covered in plate steel, held together by riveted metal. Attached to the steel walls were heavy restraint chains. These steel walls are covered in scratches. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it because it's impossible. But everyone was thinking werewolf. George died. There were no more sightings at Keith and Diane's home. George was buried in an unmarked grave. His cabin was torn down. It seemed like George didn't want to hurt anyone. It seemed like George knew exactly what he was. But if there's one, there's many. Maybe that guy that works at your local grocery store, maybe he's one of these things. That guy that gives you the creeps at your local Sheetz convenience store. I find it amazing that just because you're a werewolf doesn't mean you get to escape capitalism. Even as a member of the paranormal, life, death, and taxes will not evade you. Our last tale is going to take us all the way to Eagle, Alaska, sometime pre-1979. There are 5 young men: Jack Friedman, Saeem Hanja, Jerry Horn, John Temple, and Mark Baker. And they have decided that they are going to backpack through Alaska, far from civilization. Now they're making their way south. And after about a month of hiking, they get to Eagle. Now Eagle, Alaska is on the Yukon River. It's an old gold rush town. I actually have had a family member who went to Eagle, Alaska. And whenever I asked him, what do the people do there? Said, your job is to survive. So that's the kind of territory we're talking about. These men, they are hiking through just some of the most gorgeous wilderness. And they decide they're going to camp on this ridge. This ridge overlooks a spruce forest, snow-capped peaks, glacial rivers. Absolute heaven were it not for the temperature. Now, one of these campers, Mr. Jack Friedman, he is a trained pilot. He actually taught night navigation in the Coast Guard. Jack wakes up just a little bit before dawn, walks to the nearby stream, and he's going to just wash up a little bit. And that's whenever he sees it. A squadron of aircraft, but these aircraft are circular. It's not 1, it's not 2, it's 15 or 20. Friedman himself says, I wasn't awake, but that woke me up. Friedman guesses they were probably about a half mile away, down in the valley. 20 to 30 feet in diameter, they were glowing a warm orange glow. Translucent, like those glow necklaces that they sell at rock concerts, except instead of green, they're orange. Friedman said these craft looked like 2 half shells separated by a black band in the middle. An empty space that circled them. Jack is just standing there, eyes open, watching them hover. He said they moved like lit-up hummingbirds over a clearing. Jack is a practical man. He's never believed in all the UFO stories. But he believes now. He's quivering all over. He said he felt like he just stuck his finger in an electrical socket. He was stunned, hypnotized. By the time he gets himself together to wake his friends, the craft are gone. He tells them, and everyone there, the other 4 men, think Jack has lost it, that he's been hallucinating. And Jack kind of believes this too. The image, though, was so definite in his memory. He knew it wasn't a dream. But it doesn't jive with reality. To humor Jack, the men decide that they're going to go check out that clearing in the valley where he saw the UFOs hovering. And it takes them a couple of hours to pack up their stuff and make it down there. In normal stories, this is where they would tell you, and we found nothing. I'm sure the men wish they found nothing. In the clearing, there is a huge circular imprint. A crop circle. A place where the grass has been flattened, scorched, swirled out clockwise from the center. It is a crop circle. There are 4 triangular prints near the circle's rim that went down 2 or 3 inches into the soil. It doesn't even just get the grass. It gets small trees and saplings too. Broken, flattened. And there's this white filament, feathery, sort of like spider webs, on the leaves and the grass at the edge of the circle. They wanted to take some with it, but every time they touched this spider web stuff, it just disintegrated in their hands. But that wasn't the real sight. It was the bodies. Hundreds upon hundreds of mutilated animal carcasses. Among the carcasses that they could see, moose with no legs, their antlers removed, piled separately. Elk with their internal organs removed. Caribou slumped on the ground like pop balloons, missing their skeletons. Grizzly bears, some of the biggest that Friedman has ever seen, with no eyes and no claws. Heaped in piles. Dark burn marks around the circle's edge, and some odd-shaped black rocks lying around. There was no blood, though. The wounds were closed, clean. Bloodless surgery, just like the cattle mutilations here in the States. The only thing they can guess was that it was some kind of laser. Among all of these carcasses is the body of a killer whale. An orca, 15 feet long, with the black and white markings, completely gutted. Whenever they noticed the orca, that really freaked them out, because they are hundreds of miles from the Gulf of Alaska. The men pick up a few bones, a few of those black rocks with the strange markings on them, and they hightail it back to the nearest city, which is Anchorage. Once they get back, they report what they've seen to every government agency: the Air Force, the FBI, state police, Fish and Game, National Park Service. And what do they get? Do they get their story listened to? No, they get snickers. They get made fun of. Forms to fill out. Busy work. But when they're going through customs, heading home, that's whenever the strange things continue to happen, I guess. A man in plain clothes asked the 5 men to step into his office and tell him the story. And at every step of the story, he tells them, "This is ridiculous. This is stupid." And he suggests to them that this is unreal, that you guys have lost it, and don't tell anybody in the lower 48 states. But for a guy who thought these men were crazy, he certainly seemed interested at the same time. Tape recorded the whole interview, all the while telling the men over and over how stupid it would be to tell anyone what they had seen. Now, one of these backpackers, Siim Hanja, is a Finnish student working for his doctorate in geology at Columbia University. Hanja was fascinated, absolutely fascinated by the stones that were scattered around the clearing. He took them to a research geologist at the Department of Natural Resources in Anchorage. And this geologist was completely baffled by the weird markings on the rocks. They appear to have been burned into the rocks. They can't really give him an answer of what they are. So Hanja decided, hey, I'm going to take these back to New York. I know some National Science Foundation scientists and some Columbia professors. And they're going to let Hanja use some sophisticated lab equipment. He's going to test these rocks for magnetism, mineral content, radiation. But these rocks, a dozen rocks, all of them, were stolen from his suitcase en route to New York. Hanja knows he mentioned them to the spooky guy at customs. I think we know who took the rocks. Thank you for joining us once again here on Strange Pathways. If you are having mental health trouble dealing with a paranormal incident, please reach out to the Opus Network at www.opusnetwork.org. Please go check out Case File X. Just in case you can't get to the description, youtube.com/@thecasefilex. Head over to Twitter. Our Twitter is Pathways Strange. Our TikTok, which we don't update very often, Strange Pathways Podcast. Our Instagram is Strange Pathways Podcast. Head over to our Facebook group. We are going to have images up there about what we spoke of tonight. And if you'd like to email me, you can do so at strangepathwaysmail@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us here once again on Strange Pathways. Take care of yourselves and each other.